Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello, I'm Tom Lavin. Welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. Today we're going to have an excellent show with the author of this book, High Conflict Couples. We're going to be talking with the author, Professor Lavin from the University of Nevada, Reno. This show will be especially helpful for couples that have experienced conflict and are looking to experience peace, intimacy, and validation. Let me take a minute to introduce our guest, Dr. Lavin. Dr. Frizzetti is the Associate Professor of Psychology and the Director of the Dialectical Behavior Therapy and Research Program here at the University of Nevada, Reno. This program provides dialectical behavior therapy for adults and adolescents with borderline personality and related disorders, as well as comprehensive treatment services for distressed couples, parents, and families. Dr. Frizzetti is also Research Director and member of the Board of Directors of the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder and co-developer of the Family Connections Program. He has provided training in the United States, Europe, and Australia in DBT with individuals who have borderline personality disorder and related disorders, and in dialectical behavior therapy for couples, parents, and families. And so we're very glad to have Dr. Frizzetti here. Alan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
And we're going to be discussing Dr. Frizzetti's book, which just came out. And the first thing, of course, Alan, you and I talked about this kind of like right off the bat, is there are so many books out there for couples to help them. What would you like to share with people about your specific approach in this book?
Well, for me, when I look in the bookshelf in the bookstore and I see all the self-help books, they're very useful for couples to know what to do. On the other hand, couples tell me, I know that was the wrong thing to say after they do it, after they jump down their partner's throat or say something that they regret 5 minutes later. It's how to get themselves to do it. And so this book really focuses earlier on, that those few seconds before, how to get yourself not to say the maybe nasty or mean thing, how to not make things worse, how to get yourself to do the thing that later on was actually quite obvious to do.
Yeah. Well, as I was mentioning to you right before doing this show, I was seeing a couple for therapy, and they were saying exactly that. They were saying, we know what we should be doing, and we're not doing it, and we end up fighting, and it's escalating. And I told them, I said, I've got a really good book for you to recommend, and so they're going to be working with your book. What did your research show when you were working with the couples and developing the ideas in this book?
Well, we did a whole series of studies, and in fact, I think that makes the book a little bit different than some other approaches too, because it really is based on research. We did some really basic research looking at hours and hours of how couples actually talk and how they talk when they're getting along, and then how that's different when they aren't getting along, what they do differently. And what we found was, we found a number of things. One is that some of the key concepts in this book, like expressing yourself descriptively and accurately, it's easier for your partner to then respond in a way that's understanding and validating. Whereas if you express yourself in a more critical, judgmental way, it's, even if you're hurting inside, it's very hard for the partner to hear that, and they're much more likely to respond by escalating things a little bit, being nasty back, being invalidating. And then we did a couple of treatment studies where we tried out the things that are actually described in detail in the book. And what we found was that couples who actually engaged the program, who actually worked the program, and there's a lot of practice in this book. This is not the kind of book where you read it and you have a light bulb go off over your head. You say, oh, now I understand, and then you're the perfect partner. This is a book that takes you through the trenches step by step, practice after practice. It's kind of like learning a new sport or learning to run a marathon. You've got to practice this stuff all the time. And what we found is the couples who actually do the practice week after week showed a lot of improvement. They reported really big changes, big improvements in their satisfaction with each other, Their level of personal stress went down.
Mm-hmm.
And these gains seem to last at least for some time afterwards. So it's really very encouraging.
Yeah, that is important that your work is based on research with couples. In this last minute, if you have time, could you go back a little bit when you're talking about someone describing themselves descriptively, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, for example, let's say that one partner's got dinner waiting and expecting the spouse to be home at 5:30. But the partner's got stuck in traffic or got nailed at work on the way out the door and is running late and the cell phone battery is dead or doesn't have a cell phone and doesn't call, then comes home 20, 30, 40 minutes late. Now, when they come home, of course, what the partner's been feeling all this time is worried. I'm worried. Is he or she okay? Are they going to be okay? Are they going to get home on time? But when they come through the door, usually what comes out is, where in the world have you been? Why didn't you call?
That we're going to transition. We want to know how someone might handle that in an appropriate, healthy way in a marriage right after this brief break. Dr. Alan Fazzetti from the University of Nevada, Reno. He's an associate professor in the psychology department and the author of this book, The High Conflict Couple. And so, Alan, you were just describing to us this guy's coming home late.
Right. And his wife's been worrying about him and doesn't know where he is. But then when he comes home, her brain plays a little trick on her. It's got all this arousal. Her brain is actually kind of going.
Yeah.
But now he's safe, and so worry isn't justified anymore. So the brain doesn't know what to do with all this. So it comes out as like, where in the world have you been?
Yeah.
And it comes out as an attack. You should have called. You're inconsiderate. You're insensitive.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's really hard for him to say, oh, honey, I'm so sorry I worried you. Because he's just getting attacked.
Yeah, yeah.
And it might be that he had a flat tire, or it might be that he was stuck in traffic. I mean, any number of things it could have been. Or he was, in fact, being a little insensitive. It could be. If she can slow her brain down a little bit and say, oh, I'm so glad to see you. I was so worried about you. He's much more likely to be apologetic and soothing. And they can have a really nice evening together because, in fact, she was looking forward to seeing him. He was looking forward to seeing her. But instead, they're off to a completely different evening.
Okay. So I guess would you say that, like the spouse who was at home, she was all stirred up, and rather than just spilling forth with this negativity that creates greater conflict, you coach people to somehow regulate their emotion and communicate more accurately what's really going on?
Exactly. The idea would be for her to be aware, wait a minute, my emotions are kind of jacked up right now. And so I know that we get into these fights all the time.
Yeah.
That's just an awareness. We call it mindfulness or awareness. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be safe, but I'm still worried. Because that's true. Worry is legitimate.
Yeah.
So when he comes home, I'm going to take a breath and remember that I've been really looking forward to seeing him. And then I'm probably going to smile. And my smile tells my brain, everything's okay. And then I can say, I was worried about you. I'm so glad to see you. And then he's much more likely to be able to validate her worry, her real feelings inside. She wasn't actually angry before.
Which is really what, as you're describing that, Alan, that's really a more accurate communication about what's really going on.
Exactly. It's completely accurate. I was worried. What happened? Curiosity as opposed to you jerk. Because that's not what she was thinking for the 20, 30 minutes that he was late.
And of course, if people practice that more accurate sharing rather than this highly aroused, stirred up kind of communication, this will lead to really the kind of marriage that you're talking about here, peace, intimacy, and validation
That's exactly
in a relationship. Now, of course, one of the things that you do focus on here is negativity and high emotional content and conflict. Can you tell us more about why it's important to address that?
Absolutely. We think that, based on our research and research of others, that high emotion, when emotion gets high enough, what happens is everybody gets a kind of tunnel vision. We stop being aware of the larger context of things, and we start feeling really uncomfortable. Everybody knows this. If you ever had a fight with somebody that you love, there's a real uncomfortable feeling that you've got, and you don't like it. And people start to do things to escape that feeling, to run away from it. Paradoxically, oftentimes the things that we do is to get mean or to withdraw, when in fact what we're wanting is more closeness, to be understood, maybe even to be supportive toward our loved ones. And so in reality, that high negative emotion just completely turns things upside down, and it makes communication almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. Because someone is, do you think it's more like a survival, fight or flight kind of arousal that's going on, and that one of the things that you're teaching people is how to respond to distress rather than react to it?
I think you're asking a really good question that I'm not sure we know completely the answer to. Some of it might be evolutionary. Some of it might just be social and cultural. You know, we have a culture that puts a lot of premium on being angry and being kind of loud if you don't like something. It's hard to kind of turn that off with people that you love and then turn it back on out in the society. So that's a piece of it too. But you're right. The idea is not to be reactive. It's to actually take a hold of yourself and say, okay, what is it that I want? What's the bigger picture? Not just my emotion, but what's my urge going to get me? It's going to get me more of what I want, a nice evening with the person in the world that I love the most, or is it going to get me, feeling miserable and alone, lonely? Another one of those.
That's not so good. That's so good. Well, this is some really good information, and we're going to continue talking with Dr. Frazzetti right after this brief break. Hello, and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with Dr. Alan Frazzetti, the author of this really good book, The High Conflict Couple, A Guide to Finding Peace, Intimacy, and Validation. So, Alan, this last word, validation, this is really important in your model of doing couples therapy. Can you talk with us about how important that is?
Absolutely. I call this actually the couple two-step, the basic dance steps that a healthy couple goes through. The first step is this accurate expression, the descriptive expression. The second step is the other person has to understand it and validate it. And validation gets used, I think, you go to the cinema and you park in the parking garage and then they stamp your thing and they validate your parking. You don't have to pay for it. And that's actually a very important way that we validate people that we love. We say it's legitimate. We say what you're experiencing, what you're wanting, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. It's legitimate. I don't have to feel the same way. I don't have to want what you want. Sometimes I might, but I don't have to. I could still see it's legitimate. So, one person could be cold, another person could be hot. It doesn't mean that the person who's cold or the person who's hot is wrong or shouldn't be. It just means that they are. Well, it turns out that when it comes to things like what people want or what they're feeling, those things that are hard to see from the outside, when people start to get upset and their arousal goes up, it gets really hard for people to validate. And it turns out that validation is a key thing. Here's the thing. You just try this with somebody. Next time they say, gee, I'm really tired, just say, well, you shouldn't be. And see what happens. But don't blame me. Okay? Because, in fact, what's going to happen is their arousal is going to go right through the roof. Instead say, oh, yeah, you look tired. Or, gee, you're tired. How come you're tired? Just acknowledging that they are and implying that it's legitimate, and their arousal will come down. And so this idea of validation is very central. It's very soothing when we validate and very abrasive when we invalidate. And so we really try to teach this two-step, what we call it, where one person is expressing accurately and the other person is listening and understanding and validating. And even validation can even be saying, gee, you said you're feeling this or you said you're wanting that, but I don't understand that. That's also validating because you're communicating. Of course, you are feeling what you're feeling, but I want to learn more. And that curiosity, that interest is really important too in a close relationship.
So in marital relationships or family relationships or really all relationships, if we're invalidating, if we're telling someone you're not feeling that or you shouldn't feel that, or why don't you try this instead? If we go in and we try to fix them, that's a form of it. So all of that really leads to what would you say, a spiral or a cycle of invalidation. And so they come back and they invalidate the other person.
That's right. And then there's mutual invalidation goes back and forth. Well, you're a jerk. Well, you never listen to me. Well, of course, nobody never listens. Some people might have, weak spots. But
and hence the high conflict. For couples that find that this is the kind of arguing or communication they're having and they can't seem to break it. Again, the work that you're asking people and giving people an opportunity to do will help them kind of de-escalate and learn some skills to deal with those emotions.
Right? That's exactly right. And there are some couples who have had such unpleasant conflict that they don't necessarily see themselves as high conflict anymore. They're more withdrawn and kind of avoid each other. We call them kind of post-apocalyptic. And the idea is that they really still are a high conflict couple. They're not engaging with each other because they're afraid of having that conflict. They don't know how to resolve things. They don't know how to get close. And so they avoid the whole thing rather than have it be kind of messy.
So that's like a marriage where there's kind of a truce in it, but it's really, there's a coldness between people or a distance.
There's distance. There's no way around it.
So, Ellen, one of the concepts that you also work with, I believe, is there's a difference between conflict and negotiation. Could you talk with us about that too?
Sure. When we talk about conflict, conflict is big. And it could be everything from international conflict that involves arms and weapons of mass destruction and real harm to people, all the way down to interpersonal conflict. But the idea around conflict is often that there's a right and a wrong, and we're fighting over winning. The trouble is that in a close relationship, in a marriage, in a partnership, if one person wins, the whole relationship loses. And so that's what we say anyway. So really nobody can win. If somebody wins, both people lose. And so the idea is to get out of this mindset of winning and try to switch that around to saying, wait a minute, we have a situation that requires negotiation. We each want something maybe a little bit different here. And once you describe it that way, then it becomes, okay, just like any business negotiation or negotiation that you might do with a friend or somebody at work, gee, I can't do this. Can you cover for me and I'll do this for you tomorrow? Those are not conflicts. They're not yet until somebody says, gee, you're always asking me to cover for you and you never cover for me. But, then they become conflictual because the negative emotion comes in. And so we try to get people to back off on their negative emotion, remember this is somebody they love, and approach situations as things to negotiate.
And really kind of come looking at this person and relating to them as someone that we love rather than someone that we have to defeat or get our own way. So this is some really good information, and